America's Best presents Portland Pride Soccer. Tonight's action brought to you by 7-Eleven. Also by Coin TV Channel 6. And by Cellular One. And by Supercuts. Good evening and welcome to Portland's Memorial Coliseum for tonight's opener in the inaugural season of the Continental Indoor Soccer League. Very exciting to have indoor soccer or soccer of any kind back in the city of Portland at the professional level. 1990, the last time we saw it when the Portland Timbers finally folded up shop and went away. The Continental Indoor Soccer League makes up 7 pro franchises around the United States and Mexico. Yes, one team from Monterrey. But tonight, Portland takes on the Sacramento Knights in the opener, again, of the inaugural season. We'll come back and talk about soccer and have the opening opening kickoff right after this quick timeout.
Welcome to Good Seats Still Available, a curious little podcast devoted to exploring what used to be in professional sports. Here's your host, Tim Hanlon.
Oh, man, can you tell what decade we're in? That lead-up music, my goodness. How you doing? It's Tim Hanlon, your pal, your doctor of defunct, and your reverend of relocation. It's Good Seats Still Available, the curious little podcast that is devoted to what used to be in professional sports. Thanks for coming back again this week. We appreciate it. And, we get some nice email once in a while. Actually, quite often. I can't complain. Most of you are very just generous with your comments and great stuff. And sorry, we can't get back to all of them all the time. But we got one a couple of months back, and I could not avoid it because the subject said CISL Indoor Soccer, Portland Pride, Premier Soccer Alliance, Portland Pythons. Right there, you had me. You had me right there in the subject line. Hello, Tim. My name is Rob Hawksford, and I have professional indoor soccer stories to share. I work with the Portland Pride and Portland Pythons from 1993 to 1998. I started out as a game day volunteer and completed my career as the general manager for the indoor soccer club. Please let me know if you're interested in my story, and boy, oh boy, was I. It couldn't have been more than a few minutes after receiving that email that I responded in a positive form to Mr. Hawksford, and here is the result of that extended set of emails. Rob is our guest this week, and we're going to be talking about the Continental Indoor Soccer League again. Yes, we have done so in a bunch of previous episodes. For example, our friend Ken Tomach, who was our episode 39 guest. Tomash, I think is really how you say it. I get all excited there, but it was a fun conversation about the Indianapolis Twisters, also known as the Indiana Twisters, for a year or so. And of course, you cannot forget our conversation with the founder and the commissioner of the CISL, Ronnie Weinstein, from our episode number 176. He was also part of our episode 166 about the LA Lasers and the MISL, but I digress. The CISL, a fascinating little, I wouldn't call it, I think it's more than a footnote in pro soccer history in the 1990s. And as you'll hear in our conversation coming up with Rob, the late 80s, early 1990s was a very, no other word to say it, as dark time for American soccer fans, pro soccer fans in particular. The NASL pretty much breathed its last around 1985 or so. The World Cup wasn't announced as coming to the United States until 1991, and obviously didn't happen here until 1994. And the promise or the premise of a new pro league wasn't going to kick in until, it was actually, I think it was supposed to start in 95. Or maybe even 94 for that matter. I think it was supposed to be 95, but it didn't start until 1996. So really from 85 to 96, the professional soccer scene in this country, as we've talked about on a number of occasions with other guests, was kind of a gut punch, frankly, if you had been a fan of the NASL, and it kind of just vanished overnight. Yeah, there were some really good, smaller, let's call them really, honestly, more semi-professional leagues, the American Professional Soccer League, the Western Soccer and Alliance, and the MPSL was keeping the indoor game alive after the MISL itself, then renamed MSL in the early 90s, kind of petered out. The CISL, which is a Southwestern kind of league, lots of little small efforts and stuff to sort of keep things alive, but it was certainly nowhere near the grand Klieg lights of the NASL prior and what would become the Major League Soccer effort circa 1996. But this bright little light known as the Continental Indoor Soccer League was really fun and interesting, and it filled a gap. And we'll get into that history in Portland, Oregon, where there were two franchises. And Rob will walk us through the journey there, just kind of starting as a sort of a fan/volunteer with the Portland Pride, which was ensconced in the Memorial Coliseum up there from 93 till 97. And then we'll also get into the interesting segue into what became the Premier Soccer Alliance starting in 1998, that lasting all of 2 years, and then it became something known as the World Indoor Soccer League, or the WISL, which is probably one of the best acronyms in all of pro sports, both past and present. The name of the team then became the Portland Pythons, and they upgraded themselves. They moved over to what was then known as the Rose Center, now known as the Moda Center, or the Rose Garden, I think it was. Yeah, the Rose Garden, and now the known as the Moda Center, still there, right across the street from each other. But this is a story of the 1990s. You hear it in the music. You'll understand the dynamic of pro soccer during this time. And in 1996, when MLS got started up, the indoor game kind of started to peter out itself. This is a story about arena owners, the NBA and the NHL in particular, who jointly own teams too, looking to fill dates in the summer. And this is a story of keeping the professional game alive in whatever form or shape possible. In Portland, as we now know, right, was both the Soccer City USA for quite some time during the NASL days, and certainly has reignited that and done a very good job, a very strong and masterful job of papering over, I guess, this sort of lost decade now with the new and ongoing version of the Portland Timbers in Major League Soccer. But our pointing of historical remembrances this week is going to the CISL and the PSA. Indoor soccer it is, with our guest this week, Rob Hawksford. Stay tuned. You will enjoy. And that clip, let's say, came from, that was the first ever game in Portland Pride history, the CISL. That was, when was that? That was, it was in, oh my goodness, I should have this at the top of my tip of my tongue here. It's June 19th, 1993. The Portland Pride against the Sacramento Knights, the inaugural game of the Pride. It was Portland 11, Sacramento 8 was the final score. That's on Coin TV, Channel 6, KOIN. And that was the dulcet tones of Michael Convery, which you did not hear, and was a voice persistently in both Pride and Pythons games for the years to come, was KFXX radio jock, morning guy, Steve Dream Weaver, who is the color analyst on those broadcasts. And I believe Dream Weaver had a couple cups of coffee broadcasting games in Portland for the Timbers, both outdoor and indoor when they were in the NASL. So there you go. That's the setup. And we look forward to bringing you our great conversation with Rob Hawksford coming up in a few moments' time. First, though, a quick shout out to our pal Dean Mitchell, who we have not promoted a whole lot of late. And we want to correct that now. And our our promotion, of course, for his great site, sportshistorycollectibles.com. Promo code Good Seats for 15% off all of your purchases. And as we've talked about many episodes before, sportshistorycollectibles.com is an amazing center, a place, an array of offerings in all kinds of forgotten sports memorabilia. From all kinds of football leagues, baseball, soccer, basketball, hockey, various miscellaneous sports. And we're talking programs and pennants and media guides and schedules and all kinds of stuff. Ticket stubs, magazines, jerseys, even postcards, all kinds of stuff. It's a treasure trove. All kinds of new inventory coming in by the week. And again, your 15% off promo incentive is that code Good Seats at sportshistorycollectibles.com. Check them out, and check them out regularly, because there's lots of great stuff there. Fairly priced, I would say, and very well lit. The descriptions are fantastic, and the photography of all the items. So you'll know with confidence what you're going to get, and Dean will make sure that you get them in a speedy fashion, as well as all in one piece. Again, sportshistorycollectibles.com, promo code Good Seats for 15% off. Thank you, Dean. Thanks for your patience and your support of the show. And why don't we now move right along into the world of 1990s CISL soccer, shall we? Here's our conversation we had with Rob Hawksford. Let's talk Portland indoor soccer back in the 90s. Our conversation from just a few weeks back. Thanks for listening, and please, as always, enjoy. This CISL thing, we've gone into it with a couple of different nibbles, with a couple of folks, including Ronnie Weinstein, the guy who largely helped create this thing. But why don't we kind of start from the start? What are you doing in 1989, 1990 that you have become ensnared in this new fledgling thing called the Continental Indoor Soccer League?
Yeah, no problem. My soccer background, much like yours, I was a huge NASL fan. I'm originally from Seattle, Washington, and I grew up with the old Seattle Sounders of the NASL, and that was like a passion from the very beginning. Since I was 7 years old, basically, used to go to the games at Memorial Stadium in the Kingdom, and did all these things with the NASL as far as following him as much as I could and going to games, and basically got down to Portland, Oregon for a game, up to Vancouver, BC, and I live in Portland now, and I have for a lot of years. But back to your original question.
So I'm sorry. So you essentially were one of these original Cascadia Cup kind of guys, right? Yes. You were sort of experiencing that sort of first generation of stuff, even though there wasn't even such a thing back in the day. But
yeah.
NASL fans, it was sort of this sort of Garden of Eden of unbelievableness, because people in New York and the East Coast it's like, what is this fertile territory known as the Pacific Northwest? Yeah,
it was fantastic back in the day. I would get down to Memorial Stadium and see, the teams with Jimmy Gabriel and Dave Gillett and Mike England and Big John Rollins played up front. I mean, there was some incredible players, and I was, all of 7 or 8 years old. And I mean, it was incredible. And then when you go down to Portland, you're seeing a really very fanatical kind of group of fans down there that really were passionate. And even going up to Vancouver, BC, and watching the Whitecaps play up there, it was nerve-wracking as a kid, because I think at that age, you're not really fully realizing, how intense these adults are at the game. As a kid, I just wanted to watch the players play. I still play soccer in my 50s today. I've always played, and I was very much wanting to just get better and learn everything I could about the game. But back to your point, I mean, the crowds, the atmosphere for the original Cascadia Cup, it was amazing. I mean, it really was. And I was very happy that I got to go down to Portland in my young years, or up to Vancouver, BC in my young years, to witness that. And I still watch the Cascadia Cup games now down here in Portland, or travel up to Seattle where my family still lives. A lot of my relatives are still up there. And it's really cool that the MLS figured it out, that they needed to get all three of these teams in the MLS as we know it today. And the history is incredible on that side. But yeah, so I basically went through that as a youth. And then what really got me going was I was starting to bump elbows a little bit with some of the old Seattle Sounders. I'd go to Northwest Soccer Camp that Cliff McGrath, very well-known individual in Pacific Northwest. He had a soccer camp, and I went there as a kid. And so, I'm meeting Tony Chersky and some of the other starters for the Sounders who came up and helped coach at those camps. And that made a big influence on me. And then played high school soccer. And then another big thing that I was a part of that I thought was really cool from grassroots up in Seattle was they had the thing called FC Seattle. So right after the NASL folded, they pulled in the Western Soccer Alliance, and there was a Portland team, there was a Seattle team, there was, some California teams. And they built this program called FC Seattle. So you had one pro team, and under the pro team, you had 6 or 7 minor league teams. And so for us to keep our college eligibility, we didn't sign any contracts. We just played in the city league. But then again, I'm rubbing elbows with some fantastic players and coaches, and it was just a great experience. And then went on to play for Bernie Fagan, who was part of the old Portland Timbers NASL team at Warner Pacific College down in Portland here, where I live now. And Bernie brought me in, and again, I'm just completely enamored. I'm playing and being coached by former NASL players that I used to go and watch all the time. And Bernie was great. I'm still good friends with him. I still go to lunch with the guy, with other players from the team. He's still here. He's still around. He's an ambassador for the Timbers down here for the whole city of Portland, and he's just a fantastic individual. And then another person that I rubbed elbows with was John Bain, and John Bain played in the old NSL for the old Portland Timbers. And so here's how I crossed. This is what got me going with the Portland Pride, and I'll come in full circle with the indoor soccer. So John Bain and I, we coached at Mountain View High School in Southern Washington, in Vancouver, Washington, and we had the high school team. He coached the varsity, and I had the JV team. And, John Bain had just recently come out of the outdoor pro circuit and was kind of settling down and maybe playing a little bit indoor here and there, and just kind of like looking for stuff to do. So he and I were coaching at the high school, and that was in the late 80s, 89, 90, 91. And then wouldn't you know it, the CISL pops up in 1993, and the Portland franchise, they basically tapped John Bain to coach the CISL Portland Pride team. And I'm coaching with the guy, and where I got my original start with the Portland Pride indoor soccer team was John had asked another guy by the name of Jeff Brooks and myself to see if we'd be interested in working game day operations. They just needed help at the games, for the Memorial Coliseum back in the day. And so that's where it all started. I got on board with that right away, got maybe $100 to show up on a given Friday or Saturday night, or sometimes a Wednesday night. And the CISL was born.
Yeah, so it's actually helpful and important to kind of tell our audience a little bit about sort of the I guess you'd call it sort of crazy patchwork of quote unquote professional soccer during this era, right? Because the NASL, obviously, we all know, was kaput by '85. The MISL was, I wouldn't say ascendant, but it was certainly stable and significant enough. It was sort of making itself known, and frankly, for the latter part of the 80s, right, it was, if you will, really the only, if you could call it that, top tier professional soccer being played in this country. It's a whole nother sort of conversation about sort of, do fans want indoor or outdoor, all that kind of stuff. But soldiering on, right, there was these sort of things called the Western Soccer Alliance, which also had an East Coast mirror image of itself, with the, I guess it was the APSL, or it was called the ASL for a cup of coffee, all that kind of stuff. Washington Diplomat's name came back, all that stuff. There was a championship played between these two once in a while, and all kinds of sort of fits and starts. And then the background also is, 1994, obviously the U.S. World was getting the World Cup. So that was kind of announced in 91, 92-ish, right? And then the drumbeat of, well, FIFA wants a professional top-tier Division I outdoor league again. But those are, we call them kind of the dark ages, we soccer fans, right? Because it was like these players, and you're actually getting to coach, and you still know them and stuff. And weirdly, you're actually getting to, be a professional with them after having seen them in the stands just a few years prior.
Yeah.
Right? It's a weird dynamic because we've talked about it before, but in the late 80s, it was kind of almost, I think a lot of soccer fans in this country felt abandoned, bewildered, and just kind of didn't know what to do, and they wanted to soldier on maybe in the shadows until maybe something else comes up later on.
Yeah, for sure. I remember that time too, because I was very upset when the Sounders basically closed up shop. And again, I'm still living in Seattle before Portland at this time. It's 1983, and they're shutting the doors on the program. And so the NASL lasts a couple more years, and it was a very small shell of what it was in the past. But I started thinking that same thing. I'm like, okay, where's everybody going to play? Where's everybody going? World Cups are still cycling through every 4 years. And I was at that point too, where it's like, I played college soccer. I was at a point where it's like, well, certainly I've got nowhere else to play. I don't think I was good enough. I'll just be honest. I don't think I was good enough to get to the next level. But a lot of the people that I played against or with were getting to that next level. But there wasn't a lot to choose from. And that's where the FC Seattle thing came into play. Portland Timbers were in that league for a little bit in the Western Soccer Alliance, like we were mentioning. And yeah, it was a lost era. It was really bizarre. And then, so the link, when I look back at my career with what I did with soccer as a whole, I was in my 20s, maybe early 30s, when we're talking about this gap, between the NASL, the old league, and then the MLS. And there was a lot of different leagues in between, and people trying to get things going. I admire all those folks who really tried to put something out there to keep the ball rolling. And yeah, it was a fun time for me, and I was very fortunate to have met and got to know a lot of these guys that I used to go down the old stadiums to watch when I was a kid. And now I'm working with them at the Portland Pride, or I'm coaching with them, or one of my coaches was in the old NASL and played next to George Best and Canalia and Cruyff and Pelé. And I mean, the list goes on. I mean, it was kind of surreal to me when I look back on it.
Well, let's also part of this background too is the early 90s. The MISL was starting to wobble to the point where they dropped the indoor from their name, Major Soccer League. There was sort of talk of which is sort of a pipe dream for a number of different entities over the years of trying to be sort of outdoor and indoor. You shed the indoor name. I think that soldiered on for 2 years or so. So the indoor thing was now, and the AISA had kind of grown up into sort of this. It was a challenger, second tier indoor league, and then it changed to the NPSL. So there was definitely still this winter thing, albeit sort of, I guess, winnowing or maybe losing some of its initial, no pun in St. Louis steam from its original league. So, okay, so we're talking early 90s now. Amidst that backdrop, both outdoors and indoors, what do you know of this CISL when you get this opportunity? Are you excited? Is it truly, do you feel like it's pro? Do you have an arched eyebrow given all the chock-a-blockness that's been going on in pro soccer over the years around this time? What's your inkling, or is it just a gig and it sounded fun?
Yeah, I think it was more at the beginning, more of a gig and sounded like fun. And later on, as we'll get in this conversation, I started learning more about the business and really how that CISL was put together and formulated. But yeah, it sounded like fun to me. Good friends with John Bain, and he asked for some help, and I was more than happy to do it. I really wanted to get into that area where I could see what the professional players were like in person, closer, to the field and around this whole thing with how the athletes hold themselves up and how do they, and I knew I actually played college soccer against a good handful of these guys, but that was in college, a little bit different atmosphere. And here now we're at a pro area. And so I think in general, Portland really, the Portland Timbers were folded. There was no, major outdoor team at the time, maybe a little bit of a semi-pro outdoor team, but it was really a dark time at that time for Portland. And then they're going to start up this indoor team. And the thing that I think was really cool in some ways was that the best players out of the Portland market and some in the Pacific Northwest were going to play for this team. And, I've heard your podcast before, and I totally agree with the statement you'll make. It's like, I don't know if there's ever, after the CISL, been anything as close to it from an indoor standpoint that can match it as far as like the talent. Because at that time, unless you're going overseas to play outdoor, a lot of really, really good players were playing indoor at the time. So our team in Portland consisted of University of Portland players, Warner Pacific, where I went to college. We had a few of our guys on that team. And we also pulled a bunch of the Tacoma Stars veterans that came down from Tacoma from the old MISL days, like you said, the Major Indoor Soccer League. And so guys like Neil Megson and Ralph Black and Billy Crook, we got them signed on with the Portland Pride team. And we mixed them in with some really good players coming out of University of Portland and Warner Pacific College. And it was a pretty solid team. And I only, like I said, worked on the game days. I was a game day volunteer. I helped coach at their soccer camps and did a little of that at the beginning. But it was kind of cool to see it take off. And, in the very beginning, the CISL only had 7 teams in the league. And so at the beginning, you're as almost like a spectator, but involved with the team. I'm wondering, well, how viable is this? How long is this going to last with just 7 teams? But as we'll probably get into this conversation as we go on, it built up to a pretty good league for a few years there.
Well, it's also odd too, because it's a summer league indoors, right? And as we've learned in some of our previous conversations, Ronnie Weinstein in particular, right? A lot of this was sort of arena owners, especially from the NBA, a little bit from the NHL, and frankly, even some independents, if you will, who simply wanted to have more dates for stuff in the summer to fill in besides concerts and a non-existent basketball and or NHL hockey kind of scenario and stuff. So yeah, the idea of it being sort of big league certainly was appealing. And as we've learned from Ronnie in our previous conversation, a lot of it sort of came down to a belief, I guess, that the economics of the winter approach, the MISL, sort of petered out, and it's hard to compete against the incumbents of the NBA and the NHL, especially as they were starting to fully own their own arenas, right? So it sounded like this is sort of a smart solve, if you will. You've got NBA and NHL owners and or their arenas, right? Essentially investing in the idea of this, right? So it's not sort of fly by night and they have to rent their facilities per se, right? So arguably it's a little bit of a better head start than some of the other wacky propositions that had happened years before.
Yeah, for sure. Portland's climate for sports at the time was an NBA team, the Portland Trail Blazers. And they played in the late fall, winter time, and they were wrapping things up. And we were at the Memorial Coliseum our first 2 years, 3 years actually. And unless there was a concert going in there or some kind of like event that was a one-off thing at the Coliseum, there were a lot of open dates. So our ownership group out of Portland consisted of Brian Parrott and a few of his investors. And Brian Parrott was a tennis pro and pretty well known in this area if people know much about tennis. And he was actually, one cool thing that I learned about the guy was he was the promoter for the Dream Team, the very first Dream Team with, Charles Barkley and Michael Jordan, Larry Bird, Irvin Johnson, and the Dream Team played one of their first formal games before they got into the tournament. And they played in Portland. It was insane watching those players. And Brian Parrott was the guy who put this together. So he was the owner of the Pride, had a little bit of clout behind him. And he got together with the folks that, were running the Memorial Coliseum at the time. I'm sure those folks were happy to have, say, I think we were playing 7 games, maybe 14. My memory is a little shady on that as far as home games at Memorial Coliseum. But they wanted to put butts in seats back then, as they probably do today at any event. And it was a different concept because we were going indoors in the heat of the summer in Portland, and we get a 3 or 4 month window of nice weather here in Portland typically, and it disappears real quick. So those people will, the fans, the consumers, they'll want to make sure that they're not staying indoors during the whole summer. But we did okay with attendance, actually. It wasn't staggering, but we did all right.
What are you doing then? What's your role? What's your day game role? And you're mentioning obviously the soccer camps and all that kind of stuff. But I mean, literally walk us through, and maybe a bit of background on the stadium situation, because obviously you moved to the, I think then brand spanking new 1995 or so Rose Garden. But enlighten our audience a little bit what this Memorial Coliseum was about, because Memorial Coliseum had indeed seen indoor soccer prior, back in the old Portland Timbers days when there were these little tournaments, right?
For sure. Yeah, it was it was kind of interesting. My first kind of go around as a game day operator, I'd get there 9 or 10 a.m. I spend the whole day down there. The reason why I'm getting there so early is there's a couple of us that would be down there for the team practices. So Portland may have from 9 to 10, they do their walkthrough, they have a light practice, and then the team they're playing against, say it's the Dallas Sidekicks, they'd come in and train from 10 to 11. So we would get down there and kind of open doors up at the Coliseum. There'd be, some Coliseum employees down there, but mainly for security. And then we would kind of get everything set up around the locker room area and make sure everything was put together on the field and, just get everything set up for the practices. And then the teams would finish up practices, hang out a little bit, and then we'd go grab some lunch, the group of 3 or 4 of us. And then after lunch, then it got to be the time where we would start hanging dasher boards. Now the boards were up, but we had advertisements, and just imagine these really like long adhesive advertisements for, say, Dodge or Fred Meyer, which is our local grocery store, or the local pizza place. We would put up the advertisements around all the boards. We would the Coliseum people that worked down there would bring out the heister before the practice even started and put the turf down, but the turf would contract and expand depending on the weather. And so sometimes the turf would roll up onto the walls, which wasn't good. So we trimmed some of it down with razor blades. And then we would use some of those pieces to maybe, fill a gap on the other side of the field where there was some cement showing. It was just kind of a circus the way that was all put together. The typical fan would come down there. They wouldn't know anything different, but I just thought it was the oddest thing that we would spend a couple hours just grooming the turf basically and getting it ready. And then we would set up different media things for the broadcasters. We would be out in the concourse areas setting up our program stands to sell programs. We would, just be working in and out with the operations people from the Coliseum that would start showing up midday. And then the teams would typically, for a 7 o'clock kickoff, would start coming in, say around 5:30. They'd go through just, whatever rituals they had. And we would make sure that they were all set up in the locker room area. The referees would start showing up. All of these things that go and put, it's crazy to think. And I still have notes from way back in the day of what kind of detail goes in from behind the scenes. Because as a fan, you walk in there, you show your ticket, you get in the facility, and you get some food, you go to your seat, you hopefully enjoy a really fun event, but there's a ton that went into it. So that's what I did my first couple years. And that was basically a game day operation. And we'd get out of there after the game around 10:30 at night, maybe 11. And then, wherever the post-game party was at, we'd definitely go down there and have a couple beverages and enjoy the evening after being, involved with the whole, scenario for 8 to 10 hours, but it was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed it.
You sent some notes earlier on the field surface and stuff, right? So I'm always curious, and even in today's major arena soccer league and stuff, I'm fascinated by what the turf situation is. Can you describe a little bit more in detail that? And in this case, right, there was no, I don't think at the time, minor league hockey team. Maybe there was. How much of well, there wasn't, because it was playing in the summer, so forget that, right? So there was no ice. So you're putting the surface on top of what? Concrete, on top of something like a board thing that normally would be overridden by ice, or what?
Yeah, so concrete. The turf back then, on our first couple years at Memorial Coliseum, I still have, as one of my carpet rug type of things in my garage, I still have a large piece of this. Tim, this turf was the brutal plastic, old school, very sharp, coarse kind of material. And the Memorial Coliseum people would bring their heister out, and they would roll in, I want to say it was like 8 to 10 huge rolls that would go across the rink. And they would put those in place. Velcro would be used kind of underneath the turf to kind of keep the seams as close together as possible. But we were basically laying very, very thin profile carpet over cement. And there was one incident, since we're talking about this topic, the Portland Winterhawks were our, WHL. I can't remember the acronym for the league, but
correct. Western Hockey League. Correct.
There you go. Thank you. And so the Winterhawks did have some kind of event. And I remember the the whole system, when they melt the ice, and it just turns to water, and then they squeegee off all the excess water. But the floor is still kind of cold. We put our turf down above that, and what it did, it made a slippery. The turf was not very stable on top of this wet surface, which is wet cement, basically. And so during the game, I felt like, oh my gosh, the players are like, they're losing their footing more. It seems like the turf is moving a little bit more. And I'm just thinking, God, there's going to be a knee blowout or something real soon, or a bad ankle injury or something. But we got through that game. But that one sticks out in my mind because that was one of the only times we kind of overlapped with the hockey/soccer setups. Yeah, it was basically thin carpet over cement. There was not a lot of cushion back then in those days.
How was the team selling itself? Were you involved in any of the promotional stuff, the selling of tickets, or anything outside of the game day experience to kind of help some kind of attraction?
Yeah. So fast forward to about 1995. That's when Brian Parrott sold the team to another group of investors. The lead guy on that was Norm Daniels. And basically, I got hired as a full-time office person. I was the assistant director of operations for a title back then. And so now I'm kind of more immersed inside the business side of it. And so to your original question, we did a lot of promoting with soccer camps, soccer tournaments that had our name on it. We had player appearances all over town. And so I personally was only involved with getting those events set up. And then I would use a lot of my connections, word of mouth. We had a full-on ticket group, ticket sales group. And there was about 3 or 4 of those people that were split up into group sales, individual ticket sales, season ticket sales. So we had a department set up for that. But by this time, we did some advertising on in the newspapers around town, a few billboards. Not very many billboards, were expensive. We had, not the biggest budget in the world, as probably most of these teams didn't. But that's how we kind of got the word out about the tickets. Portland and Seattle, like we talked about earlier, and even Vancouver, I'm sure it just, soccer just, people gravitated towards the sport. We did not kill it in terms of attendance. I still to this day thought we should have done a lot better with attendance, but we did what we could with what we had, and we would average between 5,000 and 6,000 fans during the course of the years that the Pride was in existence, and that filled up probably half the Coliseum or half the Rose Garden, but again, the budgets didn't really allow us to, go crazy with the marketing. But yeah, so I didn't really get specifically involved with the ticket sales, but definitely was, I saw a lot of it going on.
How about scheduling? The premise of this entire league, right, was to fill in ostensibly a litany of blank dates during the summer months when hoops and hockey were not being played. Did you have fairly decent dates? And if I remember correctly, and this is maybe me projecting here, but I want to ascribe the phenomenon of midday soccer camp and or youth kind of games, midweek, if you will, like not traditional evening or weekend games, to the CISL. I may have had that wrong, but I think this was around the time when some of that, if you will, experimentation was going on, where, hey, let's bring the kids in during an afternoon during the week instead of, a traditional nighttime evening game. I don't know if that's true, number one. Number two, if you guys participated in anything like that. But what about the scheduling?
Yeah, no problem. Washington Warthogs, one of the teams in the CISL, they did that actually. We got some numbers from them and we got some feedback. They did an afternoon game, and that's what, Tim, they totally tied it into a camp or some kind of tournament going on. And I think if I remember correctly, they had pretty good success with it. In Portland, we never tried the afternoon game. So what we were up against in the summertime for scheduling was a concert would definitely knock us out of there. There was also, I don't know I know you look at and dabble in a lot of different sports. Do you remember a professional roller hockey league?
Yeah, roller hockey international, of course.
Yes. And so Portland, I want to say, had a team for 1 or 2 years. And so we were kind of fighting with them and jousting with them for Friday and Saturday night dates. And so our scheduling, if there was some kind of like event, I don't know, trucks, I can't even think of the term, but, the race car, not even race car, but anyway, they had some things in the Coliseum that would bump us because it brought in a lot more, I guess client, fans, and it just, from a revenue standpoint, it made sense for the Coliseum to maybe take us away from some of those dates. So scheduling for us wasn't as challenging as probably for some other towns, but we definitely lost out on some good Friday and Saturday night game nights that we really wanted, and that became a frustration too. And later on, when NHL was starting up camps in the fall or late summer, Portland was really trying to get NHL in the Rose Garden back in the day. And so I remember one time Pittsburgh Penguins and the Anaheim Ducks came in and did an exhibition game in there, probably in August or September. And so we got moved over to the Coliseum, I think, for a game. And they got the Rose Garden, of course, because they probably sold that thing out, because that was at the time they were really trying to get the NHL into town.
People yelling at their devices. It's the Portland Rage of Roller Hockey International.
There you go. Good.
93 and 94 were the 2 seasons there. Well, okay. So, but it sounded like, though, you had a fairly decent shot at some good dates and stuff. How would you describe the difference between the Memorial Coliseum, which is still standing, I was surprised to find out. But then again, I haven't been to Portland in 15, 20 years. Historic registry and all that kind of stuff, but it's literally right next door to the Rose. It's called the Moda Center now, but back then it was called the Rose Center. What was the? Give me a sense of the difference between the arenas. Obviously, the size difference, but was there a marked upgrade, so to speak, as the new arena back in? Did it help or hurt attendance at all? Did it feel more professional, so to speak, now that you were moving into the big dig?
Yeah, I would say definitely more professional. That was Paul Allen's thing, where he had taken over the Blazers at that time, and this was his building, and it was, oh my gosh, back then. I mean, it's been around for a while, right? But I mean, state of the art on everything back in the day. The Coliseum, and I agree with you too. I'm so surprised it's still there, and it is, and they still play some of the hockey in there and have concerts in that facility. But the Coliseum just was run down. I would be behind the scenes in different areas of that Coliseum that a lot of people probably never have. It's just the operational side of things. And, you go down a little hallway and you would see stuff and garbage and just junk kind of in a corner. You go over to the Rose Garden, 200 yards away, you walk in there and it's pristine. It's clean. It's sight lines in there are great. The acoustics are great. The sound is great. The big thing for the Rose Garden back then was the video replay board, which was your scoreboard too. In the Coliseum, they did not have that set up, one of those scoreboards set up. So if there was ever a replay that you wanted to see after, a great, amazing play, you pretty much better remember what happened in your mind, because you're not going to see a replay on the spot. And that was, and it kind of shows you how long ago this was. That was like a big thing to have this very clear, very easy to see replay board, which was your scoreboard / replay. And so that was a big plus. I think you hit the nail on the head when you said it earlier. It just felt more professional. I felt like at that time, the league was doing really well. When we moved into that building, our fan base was very strong, although I still think we should have been getting more like 8,000 or 9,000 people per game. We were still hovering around the 5,000 to 6,000 per game. But I think that the fans that attended those games probably enjoyed it a lot more too. It was just the clean, nice building that you could walk into, and it smells good and it looks good, and you feel like, we've arrived.
Tell me about the quality of play and how similar or dissimilar it was from your recollections or knowledge at the time of the old MISL and the indoor soccer kind of thing. Obviously, they're the NPSL, the indoor fall and winter league, right, had this sort of wacky point system. CISL didn't have that, right? But were the goals the same size? Were the rules largely the same? What was happening when a goal was scored? I mean, did Yeah, did a balloon come down and blow up confetti, or was it just kind of a normal? What was that all like?
Oh, it was great. We had a lot of good promotions during the game. I'll start with this one though. The players themselves. So I did used to go to a lot of Tacoma Stars games back in the day. I was living in Seattle. I'd drive down the I-5, go to Tacoma, and I mean, my gosh, they had Steve Jungle and Preki was playing on this team, and I go back to that comment. There was not a lot of choices to play in the United States, so we had some incredible players playing indoor, which is crazy now because the good players are going to be playing outdoor. But the style of play and the quality of play for the old MISL, I thought was really good. And then they had some, things going on. Players are going overseas. They needed to change, formats of the league and this and that. And then when the CISL starts up, I personally don't think it was as good, say, as the MISL in its heyday, but it was still really pretty strong. And, overall, the players that we were pulling from the Portland metropolitan area, and then you get up into Tacoma, and we had some of those guys coming down. Some of the skill. I saw Preki play 2 or 3 times when he was with the San Jose team, and that guy probably at the time may have been in his mid-20s, maybe getting close to 30. Can't remember exactly, but absolutely incredible player. You couldn't get the ball off his feet. We had some really good players that cycled through Portland. Ralph Black, that name just always stands out for me because he was probably one of the strongest hard-nosed defenders I've ever seen in indoor. That's the kind of player you wanted to have him on your team and not playing against you. And we had a goalie by the name of Jim Gorsuch back in the day that used to play for the old Portland Timbers. And he played a couple years before he retired for the Portland Pride. And, not the most glamorous, technically savvy goalie in the world, but he knew how to get the job done. He'd been playing indoor a long time, and he was kind of just tenacious. And he was a quality goalie. I mean, he played with the San Diego Sockers and won probably 3 or 4 rings back in the day with the MISL. So he was established. I mean, it was a great time for a lot of talent at that time period within the league. And then back to your other question in terms of, some of the aesthetics around the game. We had a couple things that I thought were pretty fun. If you caught the ball cleanly coming out of the off the field and you're in the crowd and you caught it without it dropping to the floor in the stands, we used to give a round table pizza. We would have this little jingle that would come on about round table pizza, and then an usher would come down to that person. They'd throw the ball back into the court area, and then they would get a certificate for a free pizza. And so that just a little thing like that. I still run into people today when they talk about those old games, and they'll talk about the pizza catch. We would have really good music going on in between periods. They actually allowed you to play music during the game. I think they may have done that back in the MISL days too, maybe. But the atmosphere in there was actually really good. I think our operation segment from our team, our club internally, and that's the department I worked in, and then working with the people at the Rose Garden, it was a pretty good show. I think the fans really enjoyed it.
All right, what's this? How about sportshistorycollectibles.com? Oh, boy. We love sportshistorycollectibles.com. You've heard us talk about it forever since we began this show. One of our earliest sponsors, our pal Dean Mitchell, out in San Diego. And as the name implies, it's memorabilia from all those leagues and teams that came and went and thrived and failed, but nevertheless shaped the North American sports landscape of today. And if you're looking for ticket stubs or mini helmets, DVDs, pennants, jackets, even newspapers or stadium replicas, magnet schedules, media guide, you name it. It's all there for you at sportshistorycollectibles.com. And we're talking about the best in forgotten sports history in basketball and soccer and football and baseball and hockey and all kinds of miscellaneous sports like tennis and racing, the stadiums, the Olympics even. Just amazing stuff. And, you probably have eBay on your brain when you're thinking about looking for some of those items out there. And sure, eBay's pretty darn good, I guess. And there's, of course, some high-end auction sites out there too, for sure. But sportshistorycollectibles.com is unique in that it focuses on those things that this here podcast is obsessed about, which are things that aren't around anymore, in particular teams and leagues and various related ephemera. And the good stuff is also highly photographed and well described, so you know what you're getting, and the prices really can't be beat. You don't have to worry about losing out on bids at the last minute and all that kind of stuff. And trust me, Dean's got stuff that you're looking for, and is getting new stuff, not new stuff, but new old stuff, like inventory. That's it. That's what I'm looking for. All kinds of refreshed inventory all the time. So it's just a sight to behold. So you'll lose hours of time just looking and ogling, if you will, digitally, the items from your childhood or from various followings of teams that you might have just plain old forgotten, and to see those items there for you and well photographed. You're gonna be amazed. Then, after looking at more than a few of them, you're gonna say, gosh, I gotta have me one or a bunch of them. And that's where our promo code comes in handy, and that's Good Seats. A promo code Good Seats for you at sportshistorycollectibles.com for 15, yes, 15% off all of your purchases. Again, our thanks to Dean Mitchell and his pals at sportshistorycollectibles.com. Promo code Good Seats for 15% off all of your purchases. As they say, you'll be glad you did. Thanks, Dean, for your sponsorship of the show. And now, back to our conversation. How about the players? Did they sort of enjoy the experience? I mean, I can't imagine there was a whole lot of great salaries there. Were they kind of into it? Were they promoting? Were they happy to be there, happy to have a place to play, so to speak? Or was it, I mean, I'm just curious as to, you're mentioning some quality players, but obviously you had a bunch of it's a whole generation of players, right, that had seen this outdoor set of leagues and stuff, and then even the indoor league basically sort of dissipate, go away. I got to imagine the bulk of them were happy to be there, albeit not for really much money, maybe except for some vouchers after the game for some food somewhere. I don't know.
Yeah. Our players, minus maybe four, we call them A contracts. So the top four players on each of the teams in the league were on A contracts, and they probably made, I don't know, $4 or $5 grand a month back then. Pretty good chunk of money, I guess. The rest of the players, the B players, the C players, and then the game appearance players who would just literally, if they stepped on the field, they would get, I don't know, $150 for their troubles for playing for, a few minutes in the game. But the majority of our players, I could just tell, were very happy to be involved with the team. It was ran professionally. They did not make very much money, but they were playing professional soccer and they were traveling and everything was paid for. I believe, just based on what you're saying and what I know, a lot of these players had a second job, or they were doing a lot of soccer camps, or they were getting paid to coach on the side. So this wasn't their only source of income by any means, but I was about the same age as a lot of the players, some of them being a little bit younger, but I remember thinking, because I was such a soccer nut, I wanted to play, I'll get out there and play for $125 a game, and a lot of these players that were in their mid 20s, late 20s, I thoroughly believe they enjoyed it, and they probably still go onto YouTube and maybe watch some of the games that are posted on there, just to relive that. And I think it was, it was set up in a very professional fashion. It's unfortunate the league did not gain any extra momentum and last longer. And there's a lot of reasons why that didn't happen. But for those guys in their 20s and 30s, I'm sure that it was a great time for them, and they were a lot of fun to be around.
Well, I want to go into that denouement in a second, but I want to double click on that the pay structure there. So you're basically saying that there were some must-have A-listers, sort of I guess somewhat exclusive contracts. There was the sort of mid-tier player, and then there were these. So describe to me these per game player types. I mean, were they practice squad guys who would dress but not necessarily be guaranteed a shot at the game, or because it sounds like a very maybe almost ingenious way to keep costs low on the payroll front.
Yeah, for sure. So I think each roster consisted of somewhere between 18 and 22 players. You could only suit up. I think it was 16, maybe 17 a game. But then you still had 5 to 6 players that were, involved with the team. They were actually on a contract, but it was more of a contract to be committed to being available to be on the team than a certain salary structure. But those bottom 4 or 5 players on that, pecking order were paid X amount of dollars, 125, 150 for a game appearance. The other players were basically receiving a paycheck each month or every 2 weeks from the league office, because the league office handled pretty much all the salary structure and payments to the players, which I thought, going back to Ron Weinstein and the founder of the league, I thought I kind of, for the way that league was set up, and I thought it was kind of wobbly at the beginning, but it seemed to gain more momentum. But I thought that was a pretty good idea, the way that some of the teams were run. It's probably good that they had to pay their dues. And when they paid their dues to, the head office in California, Los Angeles, then they would make sure that the players would be paid. There was no question about that. And like I was mentioning earlier, we had A-list players, we had B. Those guys, were maybe, a couple $1,000s less than the A's. And then maybe, the C players were $1,000 or $2,000 less than that group. So it was just tiered out. And the coach at the beginning of the year would probably sit down with the assistant coach and or somebody in the office, a general manager of sorts, and figure out, okay, here's our list of players from A to Z, and here's what they're going to basically what tier they're going to be on for pay.
The first year of the CISL, obviously Portland being a charter member, it was interesting to me because it looks like it frankly was, with the exception of Monterey, which we'll get to in a second. It was largely a West Coast or a Western United States kind of thing, which to me looks like it was geographically more compact. I mean, you had teams in Dallas and Portland, obviously San Diego, Monterey, Sacramento, Arizona, Los Angeles. So with the exception maybe of Dallas and maybe Monterey, but even those are, if you will, they're not certainly East Coast by any stretch of the United States. That feels economical to me, travel-wise, cost-wise, recovery-wise for players, et cetera.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I remember when Washington, D.C., Detroit, Michigan, trying to think some other East Coast teams. We had Carolina one year. I mean, we're talking some East Coast teams. I used to book a lot of the flights for the team to go travel, and they usually would parlay it with 2 games, maybe a 3-game road trip. But yeah, I just remember when I would book the airline tickets for the team, you look at the bottom line and the dollars that were being spent, and I was like, wow, that's a big chunk of money. You got maybe 15, 16, 17 people on this road trip. The hotels for a few nights on this road trip, the per diem, a lot of it added up. And I agree with what you're saying. I think Ron Weinstein's idea at the beginning was, being cost conscious and making sure that all these expenses weren't completely through the roof. And we were more West Coast. We had more of a West Coast presence. But then you could see it, moving a little bit further east as 1995 rolled around, when we peaked at 15 teams, I believe, in the league.
Yeah, I mean, 94, I mean, you went literally from the initial 7 to 14 in just one. Yeah. I mean, I think we talked about this with Ronnie as well. I mean, the model, it seems like it's attractive, right? I mean, the fact that you get through that first season, some pretty decent crowds, pretty stable, some pretty exciting playoff games, but to go from a largely West Coast enterprise to Detroit and Carolina, and Washington, all overnight, right? That's that's at least a handful of cross country trips for said Portland team.
Yeah. Yep, exactly. And that was a big expense. And then of course the East Coasters coming back over here to the West Coast and having to knock out, a trip to, say, Portland, and when Seattle was in the league, and then maybe they jumped down into Southern California and hit Anaheim, and maybe hit San Jose, Arizona. I mean, Sacramento. I mean, there was a lot of games to be played from the East Coast teams to play out here on the West Coast too. It was, the model built, and then I think the same thing sometimes with the old NASL. We were talking NASL soccer outdoor. I guess it just comes to the point where it's like, oh, let's get bigger. Maybe not better, but let's just keep getting bigger. It could be more attractive to big sponsorships with radio, TV, and automobile deals for sponsorships. It's too bad that some of these leagues got a little bit over ambitious at the beginning, but it is, the way it is, I guess.
So let's also now talk about the aforementioned Monterrey La Raza, because this was an interesting wrinkle to this league in that it was the only franchise, at least at the time, I think actually for the entire league existence, in Mexico outside the United States. Not necessarily a new phenomenon because North American various sports leagues have had Canada and the United States, but this, I think, was really kind of the first real attempt at mainlining, shall we say, a full-time team in a professional league south of the border. You mentioned a couple of things in our notes prior to this recording, but I had to think that was a bit of an outlier on a number of different fronts. This franchise, both the travel to and their approach to play, and the cost structures and the border issues and all that stuff. Yeah,
it was some of my fondest memories is the Monterrey team. First of all, that team was great. They were packed with talent, and whenever we played against them, it was always a physical battle. It was a lot of really good soccer being played. It brought out the best in the Portland team. The Monterrey team was great, but yeah. So what we would typically do is each year when Monterrey was in the league, we'd have a 2-game road trip. We'd hit Dallas, which was never easy with Tattoo and their whole team. And we'd finish up with, say, Dallas on one night, and then we travel into Monterrey, Mexico the next night. And when we went through a coaching change in around, I want to say 1997, John Bain had left the team, and a gentleman by the name of Ian Fulton was running the team, and he'd been on board for almost a full year. And we're getting down to the very end of the season, and I think we let Ian Fulton go at that time, and Ralph Black became the player coach. He was playing for us, but we just slotted him in as the player coach to finish out the rest of the year. And then we get into Monterrey. I traveled with the team on this one particular trip, and the day before we leave, I think Ralph called me up and said, "Hey, have you heard about the rule where you have to have an official kind of presence of a coach on the bench during the whole game?" And I said, "I don't know that specifically, but we'll look into it." So we did, and we did confirm that we had to have somebody like that on the bench. And so I had already got my airline ticket with the team already booked. I'm already going down there. So I became the impromptu coach for that road trip because Ralph, of course, was going to be playing in the game itself. So, had a suit on, and I'm not making any strategic moves. I'm not even really opening my mouth up. These guys know what they're doing, and they don't need me as the director of operations at the time. That was my title, trying to, tell them what the game plan was. But the games in Monterrey were absolutely incredible. The atmosphere, they played in this little mini dome, I would say, Tim, and it would seat maybe 3,000 to 4,000 people. They would sell it out every time we were down there. And they allowed any of the fans that were of age to smoke a cigarette or smoke whatever in there. And we would literally be warming up 10 minutes before the game when the crowd was rolling in and getting pretty full. And it was a plume of smoke everywhere. It was, I couldn't believe I'm standing on the side, on the bench area, like acting as the coach, but the players are running and doing all this cardio, and they're basically inhaling all this smoke. And I thought, this is just something out of a comic book. This is just completely bizarre to me. And they also would plant water bottles in our bench area and in our locker rooms that were like just regular water, I don't know, poured into these, little cups and, squeeze bottles. And we told the players, and I remember Ralph, the coach, said, "Do not drink that water. If you want any water, you got to get a bottle of water with the seal attached, so when you open up that water, or you're going to go without water, because the water down there during those years, you drink that, and if it doesn't agree with your stomach, you're going to have issues during the game." So it was just a crazy, crazy atmosphere down there. I enjoyed it, just the fact that the kids that came to these games with their parents were very passionate. They met us out by the buses after the game. They wanted our shoes. They wanted our jerseys. They wanted us to sign autographs. And they were just completely enamored with the professional athlete. I think that's super cool. It's kind of, what a lot of kids, even myself, did when I was 7 or 8 years old, and I'd be around some professional players. It was kind of, inspiring. And then we'd basically call it a night in Monterey and then fly all the way back to Portland the next day. But it was a long road trip. It was always a lot of excitement. The games were just they were probably the most intense games that I remember out of all the years I've worked with the team in terms of the competition. It was just a lot of fun.
Yeah, an interesting story, that La Raza, because it's called Monterey Tech Gym, and if you see any pictures of it, it's truly like a cracker box, like 3,500 people maybe on a good day. It must have been intense. But I think part of the allure of that franchise at the time was that there was in the early 90s the construction of a brand new sort of gleaming indoor arena. But I think it was originally supposed to be completed around 94, 95 or so. And it took 10 more years for it to finally actually be completed. I think even to the fact where when La Raza, I think, came back, and we'll talk about the Premier Soccer Alliance and then it becoming the World Indoor Soccer League. They came back for a year in the World Indoor Soccer League, and the arena still hadn't been built. I guess they got kicked out because it hadn't been finished yet. So craziness, right? But it's interesting. I could, again, this to me, you can see it from the Weinstein mindset, right? It's like if there is a new arena being built, right, or at least the plan for it, this league felt very much like a reason to exist because existing facilities existed and had time and space for it, versus we want a high level soccer because soccer needs to continue to live. I don't know. That's just but then again, if you're in the middle of it and you're playing and you have the opportunity to play, even if it's for $150 for a game, and you're getting a jersey and a couple of photos out of it, as you go back to your day job, I don't know. I got to think that it still feels better than not playing at all.
Yeah, I agree. Like I said, I would have really enjoyed doing that. I played in a couple reserve games, Sacramento and against Seattle. So when John Bain was coaching, he was putting together his reserve team, and if he came up short on players, I could hold my own, especially in a reserve game. But it was exciting just to even be a part of that. And we weren't playing in the Rose Garden or the Coliseum. We were playing at the indoor soccer arena down the street that the adult leagues reside, or the youth teams play at. So I remember playing in those games. We were on really short shifts. We had game plans. We had a couple guys from the A team playing with us, and I always mentally would start thinking, what would it be like to play on the top tier in front of a decent crowd? It'd be a lot of fun. But I was very happy to work for the team. I enjoyed my career there for sure.
So I want to get to the demise and then the PSA in a second, but tell me about the media. I mean, because there was still, how much was coverage was there? Were you getting top tier or any kind of following and treatment and stuff? And the television broadcast, I know that was sort of a patchwork. I think maybe the earliest days of the regional sports network model. There were some games, right, locally in Portland, as well as these Fox Sports national cable games too, I think.
Yeah, we had a local presence. Coin 6, our CBS affiliate, would show a game here and there. I've got some of those copies that I put up on YouTube from way back in the day. We locally, we had pretty good coverage from the local stations, but a little side story here, which I still kind of makes me chuckle today. Colin Cowherd, who does his radio / TV sports show, every day of the week and been around for a long time. He got his start pretty much in Portland. Maybe he had 1 or 2 markets before that, but he was in Portland for one of the stations here. And Colin Cowherd would come down to our games, but he really made it very clear to us he didn't want to be there. He didn't care for soccer. He was very, look, I got to be here. I'm going to interview a couple players and roll his eyes and kind of leave and not be too social. And, at the time I look back on that, I was kind of like, well, it's kind of disheartening because we wanted all the good positive feedback and all the support we could get with the media. And then he goes on to the big national platform. And when I listen to him, I kind of get where he's at. He knows what sells, and it's probably football, and it's probably playoffs or the college basketball tournament. He's got a pretty good idea that, a small market is Portland, Oregon, with indoor soccer at a time where there was really no legitimate pro outdoor league. He just was that's why he took on, I think, that persona about his feelings towards the Portland Pride. But yeah, we were on TV locally here. I do know we got a couple games that were on more of the national level too. We'd occasionally get tabbed for one of those broadcasts, but I wish it could have been more. I think that would have helped us out a lot if we had a bigger and more supportive presence from the media around here in Portland.
All right, so let's get into the beginning of the end of this and the side swipes, I guess, that sort of were buffeting this league. So 1994, right, World Cup fever, right? So an interesting dynamic, I would imagine. Although Portland itself didn't host any games, it had to be an interesting, tear at the fabric, I guess, of the soccer fan in this country, because here they are, the world's best players playing in the summer and gigantic stadiums and sold out. And, and the Colin Cowarts of the world can't ignore this. So I guess this is the biggest show on earth. You guys are trying to soldier on playing this now, maybe oddly shaped indoor version of the game. And then I get number one, I guess, what effect, if any, does the World Cup have on that year's summer season? And then I guess similar question is, when MLS starts up in earnest 2 years later in 96, did that have any effect, good, bad, or indifferent, on the CISL season and the Portland franchise in particular?
Yeah, I think the World Cup, in my opinion, helped us. I think it brought a lot more of your maybe not so passionate fans out. But now that the World Cup is on TV and people are seeing it, then they decide, hey, let's go down and watch the Pride play indoor, because that's really all we had, for soccer at the time. So I think the World Cup did kind of create some energy and actually helped us some at the gate, and just the overall acceptance of the indoor soccer. The MLS starting, I thought this is one of the things that hindered us and kind of went against us. Some of the players that were local or, along the Pacific Northwest area started getting tabbed in and signed to MLS contracts. And those were the players that were, I would call them fringe players, maybe in the MLS when that league first started. Good chance those guys would have played indoor with us and were solid players, obviously. So some of the teams in the CISL started losing some of their top-notch players, and they were going to MLS. Because you brought up the NPSL earlier, and you're spot on. The NPSL was the winter indoor league around the country, and some of our players would play 4 or 5 months with that league and then jump over to the CISL and play another 4 or 5 months. So now all of a sudden they've got income for, making money playing soccer for, say, 10 to 12 months a year, playing in 2 different indoor leagues. Well, if they get picked up by the MLS, which a lot of them did, then they play for one team, probably make a little bit more money, and they're just on one contract. Some would maybe dabble going back and forth between outdoor and indoor, but that was decreasing a lot. I think, the MLS at the beginning, the first couple of years, it was the brand new shiny car version of, soccer at the time. So everybody was very interested in that. And then I felt like the MLS just kind of flattened out in terms of, notoriety and passion and, all the things that go along with the whole experience. And by that time, though, this is when the CISL was closing up shop. And then I think the MLS really did themselves a big favor, going back to the Cascadia teams, the 3 teams, Vancouver, Portland, and Seattle. When they got in the MLS, it definitely, I think, turned a corner for the better.
Yeah, interestingly, it gave them a legitimate sort of route or connection to the true pass of the outdoor thing. And frankly, it smooths over a lot of the wrinkles that happened in between the two, right? Yet the irony, of course, is that without indoor soccer, MISL obviously to start, but the things that sort of came thereafter, including the CISL. I think many people think that the CISL was sort of the last kind of great and decently high level played version of the the modern indoor game that's sort of happened. And I think the MASL that exists now and the various leagues that have soldiered on sort of that have now sort of comprised that, the golden era, I guess, of indoor was certainly the MISL, but the CISL is probably the last great version of that. And I think it's because largely it was at that time really the only, if you could call it that, top tier pro opportunity for players that, were of playing age.
Yep, for sure.
So let me ask you this, though. So my understanding then is, around 1997 was the last year of the Continental Indoor Soccer League. And perhaps maybe MLS was having some effect. This would have the second season now having, if you will, compete, quote unquote. I think there were a couple of markets where there was direct competition. Even though the product is different and I'm sure the marketing is different, it's still soccer, and that can be conflating or confusing, maybe even to the casual fan about what that stuff is. But my understanding, though, is that there was actually, was it a surprise that the CISL sort of disintegrated? Because it seems to me, and if I remember my conversation with Ronnie a couple of years ago correctly, there was kind of a rift, I think, between the ownership groups. And I think it was largely between those who were NHL and or NBA and or maybe the arenas themselves owners, and those that were, if you will, independent of that. And I know Portland was one of those situations where I think they were kind of in the minority, if you will, of what the NHL and NBA owner types were saying.
Yeah, definitely. So at the very tail end of the CISL, you're right. And I've listened to Ron Weinstein's 2-part podcast of yours. That was a great interview. And I really enjoyed that, just for the mere fact that I could hear it from his point of view too. Because my point of view at the time was Gordon Jago, the coach of the Dallas Sidekicks, really, as far as I was concerned, wanted to go a different direction. And we were allies with the Dallas franchise, Sacramento, Arizona, and Portland. And those, our ownership was not the NBA or NHL ownership. We were independent owners, if you will, that owned our team. And so we were looked at maybe as the four rebels now. And when Dallas was such a pillar of this whole league that at the time it was
Dallas Sidekicks, for those. And that's the tattoo and taking off the jerseys and throwing them up in the in the stands, and tattoos one of the eighth wonders of the world.
Yeah, exactly. The Dallas Sidekicks were, if the Dallas Sidekicks choose to do A, B, or C, people, it caught their attention. And so we were in contact, and we were speaking with Gordon Jago and their ownership group. And I don't believe our ownership group at the time was very happy with the way the league was going, and just the whole CISL format. We felt like at that time we could have maybe produced something stronger and better. In hindsight, I think, boy, that's a lot to take on. But yeah, so the CISL basically closes up shop. And
before you go there, what was the beef though? What was the grist for the differences of opinion? Was it a desire maybe to go into the fall instead of the summer? Was it a limited number of games because the league owners, the NBA and NHL owners were, kind of nipping at the schedule opportunities to expand? What was it? Do you know or remember?
Yeah, I mean, as far as I can remember, I would sit in with some meetings with the ownership group, which was 3 or 4 strong at the time. And at that time I was assistant general manager. We had another guy by the name of Bill Lavelle. He was our general manager. He'd already given me intel that he was going to be leaving, and that made me nervous because I'm thinking, okay, if he's leaving, this league may be going down. But anyway, so I was in this position where our ownership group felt like a lot of the money that the league was making should have been, recycled back to the teams. Tim, I think it came down to where our ownership group felt like there's only a few people winning financially in this whole setup. And it was, I don't want to, say specifically Ron Weinstein. I truly don't have any issues with him. I've met him a couple of times. I don't believe he'd remember me, but I think he was doing everything he could. And I thought he was the right person for this league. The meetings I had with the ownership group, there could have been a lot of things that were kept away from me too, verbally, as to what was really going on. So I couldn't peel the onion back enough. But my feeling was the ownership group was kind of disgruntled with the way the CISL was being run at the time, and the way the finances and the sponsorship money was being allocated. We had a couple pretty big sponsorship deals that were put into place. Probably, all credit to Ron Weinstein and, some of his folks that were down there at the main office. But it was blowing up pretty quick. And I knew at one point when we had a conference call back in the day, and Jim Thomas, I think from the Sacramento Kings, was on it. You had Gordon Jago and some ownership people from Dallas. You had the folks from Arizona and our group. And I was on this particular, conference call, and it was before we officially announced that we were leaving the league, but we, on that call, all we're going to start a new league. And I was at the age too, where I was like, I wanted to stay on board for sure. But I just thought, man, now we're going from, 11 teams in 1997 to a new league. And we're only going to start with 4 teams, and we're going to try and play international fixtures with Brazil and Canada and a team from Mexico. And we would intermix and intermingle players. So a couple games Tattoo and a couple of the Dallas Sidekicks played for us when we were playing in exhibition games. It was a lot of patchwork, to be honest with you. I knew something, it was going to fall out fairly quickly after that. And it certainly did.
So, okay. So how do you get informed, and what is the gear shift to this new thing in 1998 called the Premier Soccer Alliance, which only had, 4 teams in it?
4 teams, yeah. It just had 4 teams. It was Sacramento, Dallas, Portland, and Arizona. And then we signed deals to play some international fixtures. So at that time, our general manager, Bill Lavelle, had resigned. And so they offered me the job. I took it. I don't know. I'm going to go down with the sinking ship, I guess. I didn't have a lot of very good vibes about it, but I still was all in. I'm still passionate, always have been, for soccer. I wanted to see this thing succeed. It was going to be tough, but I hung in there. And so we basically, I was not on this call, but they had a conference call with Ron Weinstein and the rest of the teams in that league, and basically said, we're out. And then Dallas called and said, we're out. And Arizona called and said, we're out. I mean, these teams are calling saying they're out. And then some team says, we're going to take a year off and maybe we'll return. But, the proof is in the pudding. It was over. And then the Premier Soccer Alliance, that I give a lot of credit to Gordon Jago. He literally built something from the very ground level and tried to build this league up as quickly as he could to keep the momentum going of the CISL with a new name and some of the existing teams. And let's go out and see if we can find a few more teams in 1999 and the year 2000. Well, it never got that far.
Interesting. So how then you, Mr. Now front office with a capital F, I guess.
Yeah.
How do you market this team? Because obviously that you've got a name change. Was that sort of fait accompli, or was there any contemplation of keeping the old name, or could you not use it because of the CISL regulations? I mean, like, how do you gear shift for not only your new role, but the fact that it's a new league and you have to communicate that to the fans, get people to pay? I can't imagine you having the same number of home games even.
Yeah, everything was decreased. I called it, let's split everything in half. Our staff, our office staff went from, I'd say 8 people. I think there was only 4 at the end, I being one of them. We went down in schedules. We went down in dates. At the Rose Garden, we didn't have very many home fixtures. Everything was cut in half, it seemed like. And then, the name change. What had happened is our ownership group at the time was pretty nervous about keeping the name Portland Pride, because I think the rift between Portland and Ron Weinstein and the league was pretty intense at the time. So our ownership group said, we got to go with a new name. We can't keep the same name. And I thought that's really challenging. Now we're here. We're known as the Portland Pythons. We were the Portland Pride. We did play in the CISL. Now we're playing in the Premier Soccer Alliance. There's just so many changes. And, as a consumer or a fan of this sport, you're probably thinking, oh, they've got a mess going on down there, and then now we're losing support. We have maybe 2,000 people at our game instead of 4,000 or 5,000. I remember a few games in there, that season of 1998. I just was looking around the stadium during the game, and I could start counting people. It would have taken me a while to get up to a couple thousand, but it's that small of a crowd where you just think there's just not a lot of people in this building. And we were paying a pretty darn good price for the Rose Garden, Paul Allen's group at the time, to lease the place out. And that wasn't cheap at all back then. So a lot of expenses. The player salaries were cut way down. It was the beginning of the end is what it was there.
And you played 2 seasons, but then it was the PSA. Did you last after 98 to the
Nope. Yeah,
gear shift to the then renamed World Indoor Soccer League, which I think, if I'm not mistaken, I'm trying to remember our conversation with Gordon Jago as well, but this is a couple of years ago now. I think, and I remember seeing still online some clips of the indoor game from England that was being played. And my understanding was that the change in name to World was going to be sort of this blend or this marriage of this PSA thing and that which existed in the UK in the indoor game, and truly kind of make it a world league. And I would imagine maybe Monterey would be interested in that, et cetera.
Yeah, you're right. Gordon Jago had a lot of connections overseas, especially in England at that time too, still as he does. And that was it. He was trying to get this over the pond league on the other side of the pond and have our league kind of join in. So maybe 4 or 5 teams from the United States, 4 or 5 teams from the UK, and build this league up. Now, I don't know a lot of the details on how that went, because by the end of the 1998 season, my 1 year with the Portland Pythons, I was let go and was no longer affiliated with the club. And it was very, very, sad. And it wasn't so much that I got let go. It was more like I really put a lot of energy in this. I started out, like I was saying earlier, as a game day volunteer to, becoming the general manager of a professional sports team. And there was just a lot of, just memories that just flowed through. But they let myself go, I think one other office person, and then they ran it with some new folks. And then that lasted 1 year. And then in 1999, at the end of that year, that was it. It was completely done. The lights were out, unfortunately, for the whole Portland Pride, Portland Python existence. And when it all happened, I felt like, how could this happen, and what happens to me now, and where do I go from here? I literally thought I'd like to work in the MLS. Seattle did not have a team, or Portland for that matter at that time, didn't want to really move. So I think soccer, from a business standpoint in my life, of that chapter, just basically ended right there. But part of the reason why I wanted to be on here today is I wanted to tell the story. It's some great memories, some great times. I wouldn't trade it for the world. My brother, while I was a general manager this years ago, my brother Greg, he had mentioned, he goes, if you think about how many people want to become a professional athlete or become a general manager of a professional sports team, there's not a lot of them, and you got to do that. And it put it in perspective for me, because it really made me feel like I contributed something in my life to the game of soccer.
Yeah, that was sort of my major sort of last question is while it may not been your career going forward, then how about your relationship with the sport of soccer? Has it tainted it? Did it not make a difference? Do you ever envision? Could you ever see yourself getting more directly involved in the sport? Was it just kind of a matter of just the time and the circumstances? I mean, what of sort of the experience? Are you better or worse for it, would you say?
Definitely much better for it. I remember when I was a kid, I wanted to play. And then when I got to a more competitive level, I wanted to play pro soccer. I got to a level where I dabbled with some good players, but I could not get to the next step. And then I remember getting my college degree. I have a business degree. And I remember thinking, God, it would be great to, put my college degree together with the sport I love and get paid for it. And that's what I did for a few years. So no regrets, no problems with it at all. I don't know. I'm in my mid 50s now, and I don't know if I would ever go even like to the Timbers and want to pursue anything like that. I still go down to Timbers games. They have a great atmosphere. I'm more just the fan now. I like watching it. I am glad I had the experience of seeing how it was built from a professional standpoint, from a league that started with, Ron Weinstein back in the late 80s, early 90s. just putting the whole thing together. So it's been a lot of fun. I still play men's league. So on Sundays I go out kicking around with the fellow players. And I think the best thing that's happened in my life in terms of this sport is it's like a fraternity. I've met so many great people. I've been around a lot with the sport, and it's always been a big part of my life, still will be. But from a business standpoint or getting involved with a professional team again, I don't think I would do it. I'd rather just go to the games and really sit back and just enjoy it all.
Where does where would you say the Pride / Python sort of history kind of does it live? Right, there were no championship banners or anything of the sort to sort of be had. There were a couple of players that made a couple of first teams and all-star kind of assignments and that kind of stuff. But for all intents and purposes, not a whole lot of on-field sort of glory, so to speak. But this is also a sport where some of these histories literally cul-de-sac into nothingness because there is no natural place for these things to go. Like the eternal hunt, and I'm told literally every couple of months that this may not sort of ever happen, but the 4 major indoor soccer league championship banners from the old New York Arrows, right? In many respects, frankly, probably should live in the Nassau Coliseum for however long that lives, because that's where it happened. And there's no indoor team that kind of took their mantle, really, that's even close to being around anymore. Different sports like hockey and stuff, you can make a case that either the team that the place moved to, or maybe the replacement team that came later on in that market could sort of house the memories and have the throwback games and stuff. But this is a different situation. I guess the question in there, maybe it's completely unanswerable, is where does that stuff live? Are you the gatekeeper, frankly, of these two teams, or what?
That's a good question. Until you asked that, I really never thought of it that way. But as you'll see, the photos and the memorabilia that I have, that I'm glad I kept, that I sent you for your the website. But I could be one of the few people in this community that has very many things, if any, like jerseys and different, tchotchkes and all these different items that I did keep from way back in the day from the team. But unless, my guess would be if and I still keep in touch with some of the players, that they would maybe have kept a thing or two here or there of the their time with the team. But I don't think there's a lot of stuff out there, Tim. I think it's a great question. If there is, I would love to talk with that person and find out what they have and kind of compare what I have. I don't have a lot, but I am glad I've kept maybe my 12 or 15 items from way back then. And I, have some media guides that I look through every once in a while just to kind of like go back in time and relive the day. But we did not win any championships. We didn't win any divisions. We were a mediocre team all in all. We made the playoffs twice, only twice. And so yeah, that's a fantastic. I don't have the answer to that because I don't know who else would have very many things from that era. And it would be fun to see what is maybe potentially out there.
I think, and I don't know if I ever brought this up with Ronnie or with Ken Tomash, our friend from the Indianapolis Twisters conversation, and Gordon Jago, of course, inheritor, if you will, and continuer of this version of the indoor story. It almost feels to me like there is a CISL type of reunion or connection that could sort of happen, right? Because some of these teams kind of it came and went, but I mean, the sidekicks were there, the Hot Shots, the Washington Warthogs, the Detroit Safari, which is an interesting story because they were the Neon prior to that, and that was sort of almost the first example of sort of a team sort of deferring, if you will, to a brand sponsorship, literally a name and all that kind of stuff. And the CISL, like I said before, is I think by most soccer historian metrics would say that's probably the last sort of high level, sustained indoor version of the game. No disrespect to the MASL, but there's still some inequalities, if you will, to sort of that league, and maybe we'll get there someday. Because I still think it's a very viable product. As a matter of fact, I look at sort of futsal and in a world where private equity seems to be throwing money at the seventh league in pickleball, and I don't know, there seems to be, if there's no, it is the best of times and worst of times for quote unquote professional sports, because there's every ESPN Ocho idea is now got money behind it, like World Tag Chase and all. I mean, it's great. I mean, I think it's fun but to think that indoor soccer played correctly or at that level with those rules, huge excitement with good players, high quality players that doesn't compete per se with MLS and finds its role within, I don't know, maybe the summer or maybe it's the winter months. I don't know. It feels like it's very viable there. I wonder where that CSL version of that history is. Frankly, I wonder where that legacy, MISL kind of lives. There's no documentary yet. There's no, there's no natural place for those to sort of go. And, I thought I heard it a little bit in not so many words from Ronnie, in that maybe there is still some germ of a good idea there. And maybe you could take the current MASL and infuse it with some more money and bring it to a higher level, throw streaming at it. I don't know. There's no question in there. It's just that you wonder, it's such an exciting version and brand of the game. As people like Preki showed, right, the skills learned in the quick, fast pace and the immediacy of having to make quick passing or dribbling decisions, right, that only helps the game, as he did when he went back into the outdoor realm. I don't know. This feels like there's something lost by it being remembered, but also not sort of being elevated to maybe its status again. And it just seems like the economics are still there, or now maybe uniquely there, to maybe bring it back in some way, shape, or form, and thus then open up the floodgates of all the memories and you getting a lot of more, valuable money thrown your way for memorabilia that you have only.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, one thing too, you were speaking of about the games themselves. I've played indoor and I've played outdoor. One thing about the indoor game that you cannot replace is the quick thinking, the tight spaces. You have to become such a different player indoor that will help you in outdoor and vice versa. There's so many different ways that indoor can help an outdoor player. The quickness, the first touch, the technique. There's so many things out there that players that are youth players right now, I think it's a good idea to play a little indoor and play a little outdoor. I think they can help benefit the skill set of any player. It definitely helped a guy like Preki. You bring that up. The guy played indoor and had the incredible tight moves and tight spaces, and then he goes and plays in the EPL for Everton, I think, for a few years, and then played for the national team outdoors, for the United States. I think a lot of the stuff that Preki brings to the game, a fair amount of it, I'm sure, was brought from indoor.
Our mighty thanks to Rob for that wonderful throwback to Portland's indoor soccer 1990s decade. Fascinating stuff. We love uncovering all that kind of stuff, and hopefully more of it out there to be found. You can follow Rob's video offerings, some really good game coverage and footage and other kinds of stuff in soccer, Portland in particular, at Hawksford5081 on YouTube. So that's R, the letter R, Hawksford, HAWKSFORD 5081 at R Hawksford 5081 on YouTube. Of course, while you're online, come on to our website at goodseatsstillavailable.com. We're always there and available for you 24/7, 365. Every stinking episode we've ever done and will do, God willing, will be placed there for your enjoyment. You'll see some great photography that supports that show from our social media feeds for each week's show. We have various books and movies and other forms of media from our various guests who may be hawking such. Just click conveniently from those links to our Amazon site, and you will get the best, quickest service, as well as you will get not only the best price, but give us a couple of shekels of referral love. We appreciate that. And it's also a great way to kind of point your friends to what this show is all about before you and they subscribe or follow us wherever you find podcasts. We're available everywhere you can find them, for God's sakes. And if you can rate and review them, hopefully positively, in those places, please do so. We appreciate that tremendously. Would you like us? Sure. Would you like us to send email to you? Well, I don't think that's most efficient, but how about you sending email to us? Well, you could do that. We're at hello@goodseatsstillavailable.com. That's what Rob did. And he found himself on the show, for God's sake. So who knows? You never know. Let's see. You can also follow us on social media. Let's see. On Facebook, you'll find us at Good Seats Still Available. On Instagram, you'll find us at Good Seats Still Available. And on the Twitter, you'll find us at Good Seats Still. Thank you to Jerry Payne, of course. Jerry Payne Audio Excellence, once again, stepping up, doing a fine job, as always. Hugely appreciated. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next week. Until then, take care, stay safe, and enjoy summer. I think it's on its way. Bye.